All right. Good morning. Welcome. My name is Laura Hunter. I'm a scientist in the Animal Behavior and Welfare research team at AgResearch, and I've been the project lead for the Animal-centric dairy industry project for the past few years. So I'd like to welcome you to this webinar, which will be the first in a series that we will run over the next 3 weeks on digital technologies in an animal-centric dairy system. So the webinar to come, sorry, I'm just switch my slide there. So today's webinar will be about the link between animal well-being and technology. Next week, we'll be talking about use cases exploring digital technology in the pastoral system. And finally, on the 1st of July, we'll be talking about building a connected farm. So today's webinar, the link between animal well-being and technology. We'll be hearing from 3 speakers, but before we get started in that, I will give us a bit of a background about this project and the collaborative team that has been involved over the past few years. So as I said, we will have 3 speakers. We'll have Gosia, Cheryl, and Jenny speaking about a future cow-centric system. What could we measure to understand cow well-being and what technology farmers are investing in? So a bit about the project. This is the Animal-centric dairy industry enabled by digital technology program, which is quite of a mouthful, and it is part of the NZ project, which was the New Zealand bioeconomy in the digital age. And this is a industry-focused example of using digital technology to understand a bit more about the agricultural systems in New Zealand. So this project in particular was a collaboration between AgResearch, DairyNZ, and Fonterra. So AgResearch is purposeful, actually, this collaboration to include AgResearch as the science that's supporting animal welfare, Fonterra with the knowledge and links to the market, and then DairyNZ there as a bridge between the science and the farmer and the more practical application side of things. So I want to give you a bit of a context about why we started this project and what we were doing. So with Fonterra, we did a piece of work around looking at end user needs and expectations in terms of the social demands and context of the dairy industry and the system as we are. So looking at the different actors and the different people involved across the value chain, farmers, producers, consumers, and public, and looking at their expectations around cow well-being. Particularly as the customer is becoming increasingly influential, we want to understand it across the whole system. So this piece of work really focused down to look at all these expectations, and the key themes that have come through is that a lot around transparency and assurance. So people, the public, consumers, farmers, and producers are all looking for assurance that dairy cows, animals are well cared for, but that we can get that through technology that's offering proof points, essentially. Not enough just to have a great farm, great animal care on farm, but we want to be able to proof point that. So looking at an animal-centric system, the aims of this project essentially was to explore and understand about animal needs and wants, how we might provide them, and the rules of technology for this. So we also wanted to be able to build a knowledge base to have tangible data to inform decision-making as well around animal care. So I'd like to give you a bit of a understanding of what we're aiming to do. This is the pieces of building blocks of this, but essentially our aims for this project were by the end of this year to have easier access to metrics of animal well-being. which are enabled by the integration of data and digital technologies to actually help decision making on farm, provide that transparency that people are asking for across the supply chain. With the ultimate goal in 10 years' time, which was the start of this was in 2020, so that in 2030, that the New Zealand dairy industry is using these proof points for quality of life that's being seamlessly integrated with digital platforms. So a bit about the project. As I said, it started a number of years ago in 2020. The original starting point essentially was to understand what animal-centric technologies exist on farm, what even is animal-centric in terms of cows, and to understand what is important for cows, farmers, producers, and consumers. The next pieces of work that we have focused on over the past few years have been use cases, really delving into things that are quite important for a New Zealand pastoral dairy system. So focusing on animal well-being, envisioning systems to improve animal well-being on farm, defining what we should measure to be able to measure well-being, and looking at barriers to the adoption of technologies. The next big piece was a piece about heat stress, which is extremely important for the New Zealand pastoral system. So looking at being able to predict and measure heat stress and investigating digital technologies to do this. And looking at grazing management as well. So identifying technologies that could be used to improve grazing management on farm, looking at lead and lag indicators, of what we can do to integrate technology to measure and facilitate decisions around grazing management. And finally, the penultimate task in this project, we've been building up to developing exemplar connected farms. So incorporating everything we've learned over the past 4 years into designing a system, a dairy-centric system that's connecting the thermal, well-being, and pasture management. So we will be speaking about all of these pieces of this project across the webinar series, but today we will be focusing on the first stages, so understanding animal-centric technologies, animal-centric systems, and what that could look like. So with that being said, I will pass over to Gosia. Before I do that, actually, I would just like to remind you that we do have a Q&A function available in this webinar today. So please do, if you have any questions, pop in there and ask your question. We will aim to answer them at the end and hopefully have a good discussion at the end. So I will hand over to Gosia.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. So yes, I have the privilege of starting here, and I will be talking about what a future cow-centric system might actually look like. And we put 2070 here because you'll see in a moment that the methodology sort of meant this was a great way to push farmers to think about things into the future. So let's see here, sorry. No. Cow-centric. All through these webinars, people are going to probably be saying either animal-centric or cow-centric. And so I think this is a great place for us to capture what does this actually mean. And very simply, even though once you start thinking about it, it's not simple, but very simply what it means is that a farming system or dairy system is geared towards the cow rather than the way that we tend to farm now, which is the cow towards the system. In order to be able to do that, we must understand what a cow wants and needs. And this can be quite tricky, but from a science perspective, there's sort of 3 main approaches that we might take. The first is observation of cows within an existing system. And this is great. We do quite a bit of this. However, it can be challenging to capture, for instance, if a cow wants something that isn't in that system. And so that's when the next one comes in, which is testing of preference and motivation. And this is done quite a bit to see how much a cow, for instance, will work for access to a resource that is meeting one of her natural behaviors, one of her needs. For instance, how much will a cow work for access to shade? In this case, though, we took a different approach and we asked for the human perspective about what a cow might want or need. So we asked.
Yeah, sorry, might just stop you there, Gosia. We're seeing your presenter view. Can we?
Oh!
Can we...
Sorry.
It's great. It's great to see your notes, but yeah.
I don't have many notes. That shows. Somebody should have cut me off sooner. Do you see it now or no?
No, still in your presenter view. Is there a different screen up potentially?
Yep. Hold on. Apologies. Share. Okay. How about I just unplug? Apologies. I'm on it. Share my desktop. How's that? Good?
That
Perfect.
looks great. Thanks, Gosia.
Okay. Yeah, no. Cut me off sooner. Okay, so farmers' perspectives. What does a cow want? Why are we asking the farmer? Well, the farmer actually is the person that is day in, day out with these cows. So arguably, they actually have a very, very good perspective. The problem is, and this isn't just from a farmer perspective, this is any type of business or any type, even at home, if you ask somebody to change something that they're doing that's quite ingrained or something that they're very comfortable with, you immediately get into this challenge where people tend to focus on historically, how are things being done, or how am I doing things now? And so it's really easy and quick for people to kind of focus on the limitations about why they don't want to change. And that can be a barrier, and it can put a bias as to understanding a little bit what change is possible. So we take two approaches to this in order to sort of overcome that challenge. The first is perspective taking, which is quite simple, but it has a very impactful. It has a large impact in terms of switching the way that people are thinking in this type of environment where they're being workshopped and asked to think beyond what they're comfortable, which is basically put people in the shoes of another person, or in this case, we asked them to put themselves into the hooves of a cow and think about things from how they would want a system to look if they were a cow. We also shifted the time, and this is why I said at the beginning about 2070, where we started this in 2020. So we said 50 years from now, that put the person more at ease because they're not messing with their current system. They're probably not even messing with their children's system. They're messing with something much further in the future. And this encourages creativity, it decreases that bias, and it also, because we're working with people in a group, it encourages people to be a little bit open-minded about what others are saying. Now, the first thing we wanted to put everybody into that frame of thought that, 50 years, wow, what can be done in 50 years? We asked people to come up with things that they used to do 50 years ago in the dairy industry. And people were really into this, came up with all sorts of stuff. And the reason that we did this is so people could say, oh, wow, okay, we've actually made a ton of changes in the last 50 years. Some of this stuff was in the last 10, 20, but overall 50 years. So this was a great place. This was a great place to say, look, change is possible by 2070, because that's 50 years, and we were able to make lots of change in the past 50 years. So we took an approach where we gave people a package of visuals, basically, photos that were created or sourced after discussions with farmers, experts like vets, nutritionists, and then also scientists about possible things, all the possible things that could be in a future cow-centric system. We allowed them to, but basically they could do whatever they want with this. And the things that they really felt, the visuals that they felt really encompassed that system would go up on this board. Things that they weren't quite sure about, or things that they said, no, as a cow, I would absolutely not want, they put into a different bucket that we then sorted through. And some of the participants were really into this, said, you know, they hadn't had time to do arts and crafts in decades. And so they were really into it. As you can see down at the bottom of this, somebody even sourced their own 3D water trough that they made from things they found in the workshop space. So it really promoted creativity. And what we have here, I'm not going to, we had tons of results. So this is just a few overview results. So this is on the positive side, this is what people really wanted in a 50-year from now system. And then they were kind of unsure if they were a cow, and then also absolutely not. And these are examples of things that fell into the management side of things. So how big the herd would be, and what would their pasture look like? Would they have access to shelter? Do they have access to their calves? That sort of thing. And then the next one I think is good because it plays into the sort of the theme of these webinars, which is sort of the technology side of things. People, the key thing that came from the technologies is people felt as a cow they wanted choice. They wanted choice in how they'd be milked. They wanted any technology that they were interacting with to actually do something personalized for them. So not just as a herd, but an individual cow could have her personalized health data. Funnily enough, people didn't feel that positive about the on-animal devices. Now, this was 4 years ago, and technology changes quite a bit. So perhaps part of that was that even 4 years ago, devices tended to be bigger. So maybe if we tried asking this question again, the perspective would change a little bit. But regardless, so those are just very simply what did a few examples. But really, we then pushed the groups and said, okay, look, this is how you'd want your system to look. Would you like to now actually say, how are we going to make some of these changes? And so in the short term, these were simple things that people felt that they've already seen their cows doing, adding things like scratching devices, and also felt quite strongly about continuing research in this space so that when they got to more of the long-term place in 20 years, they would have research to rely on. And another one was start planting trees now if we're envisioning future systems that have trees. Long term, as I've already mentioned, one of the absolute key themes that kept coming up over and over again was providing the cows with more choice in the spaces that they're in. And this could be things like choice over how they're being milked, but also things like choice, like having access to their calves if they so choose, or choice about how they cool themselves in heat stress events. Obviously not by letting cows into riparian planted areas, but perhaps there's other options. So people kept bringing up cow swimming pools and that sort of thing. So the final goal that we asked them to do was basically come up with how, what's needed to accomplish this goal. And key points, there's 5 of them, but key points was buy-in, both from the farmers and other stakeholders. So farmers would need to be on board to see the value of a cow-centric system. Coming back to what Laura was mentioning at the very beginning, why do we even want this? But also having the industry, the advisors, and support from the beef industry came up quite a bit if we were going to make some changes in terms of how calves are being handled. Also that there needs to be this slow and steady uptake to prevent or minimize the production trade-offs that might happen in the short term. Regulations and enforcements was a good one, discussed quite heated, and but basically they landed on both voluntary and mandatory standards. And finally, people wanted to see where technology could be used to help them better manage cow-centric, which means manage the individual, not the herd. And I thought I'm going to end on this point, because I think that this particular participant landed on this really well and said, look, most of the points that are needed for a 2070 cow-centric system, they're being thought of now, and they could be implemented now, starting in stages. And they said, so I don't think anything is too difficult to get to because there's a lot of technology out there already. Thank you.
Thanks, Gosia. That's a fascinating piece of work. I love seeing those results and seeing the arts and crafts every time you presented them. It's awesome. So we'll next be hearing from Cheryl O'Connor, who will be talking about animal well-being and what we should be measuring to understand cow well-being. So take it away, Cheryl.
Thank you. So then, thanks, Gosia, Laura. So then we went back to. Is that moving?
Yep, you're good now. I think you might have accidentally muted yourself there. You're good to go, Cheryl.
My slides aren't moving. There we go. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties when we're talking about technology. So we started in how then do we actually measure well-being? And as researchers, we got together and we thought we refined it, but we came up with quite an extensive list, such as 96 different elements, but that's all right, we got there. And basically we did this based on the 5 domains model about measuring animal welfare and assessment, which is based on the 4 groupings of nutrition, environment, health, and behaviour, and combined that gives you the cow experience, their overall well-being. So we have developed this based on those different domains, and they included a mix of both animal and resource-based metrics. Then we sought feedback on our list of 96. We went out in a survey, basically asking a broad range of stakeholders to give back how valuable they thought each of those metrics was from the cow's perspective for understanding the cow's well-being. So putting that, again, that kind of function on about thinking about how the cow's well-being would be. After getting those survey results, we then had feedback sessions to further explore these results, and we held separate sessions with groups of farmers, scientists, rural professionals, dairy companies and technology companies. And although we did discuss barriers and we had other elements of discussions in these feedback sessions, we actually are focusing today on what that means about the wellbeing metrics, and also with the added conversation about the technology available for some of those metrics and where that was at. So just in briefly, in a couple of those elements, this is the sort of thing, and this is the summary from all of those different stakeholder groups. If we look at nutrition, there's a suite of metrics there, and you can see that actually they were seen as valuable. And in fact, most of them were of high value, with the lighter grey, and this was an area where there was actually a lot, it was seen as a lot of current technology. This is the first area. In contrast, we move over to the behaviour domain. This had the greatest range of ratings and spread of ratings and conversation, particularly about moderate, but they did all see that these variables were valuable. They just weren't sure about what that looked like. What did good look like for the animals? This was also the domain, behaviour, where the least technology or the greatest development of technology seemed to be. So in summary, across a lot of people and all those different groups, basically those metrics, so we hadn't got it wrong, even though there were 96, were regarded as moderate or high value. They were actually providing would-be good value for the well-being of the cow. It was interesting because, of course, this just came across as a survey that actually the understanding of what that metric mean and how people interpreted what it meant was actually quite a lot of the conversation in the workshops. And also, probably not surprising, considering we've been talking about the negative impacts for a lot longer than the positive impacts and what that might be for cow well-being, they were often better understood. It was good to see that the animal-based metrics were considered of greater value for their well-being than the resource-based metrics, but that doesn't mean to say that there's not value in resource-based, particularly until we can develop some of those animal-based metrics or be able to measure them. Again, not surprising, there was a lot of conversation for whether how well that was understood, and even for the well understood metrics, what is normal? Because what does that mean for then what is bad or what is good? How do we understand what is normal, particularly across such a wide range of farm systems in our areas? And as I said, we did talk about technology because that's the focus here, and where are the gaps and what is part of those conversations. And we will come back to some of that with some of the use cases in the next webinars. And also, it came from these workshops about the fact that there is a lot of technology that needs to be validated for our pasture-based systems. They haven't necessarily been developed here or used on animals in pasture systems, and the whole data integration of the different data that we're getting, which again, we will come back to, as Laura mentioned, part of the reason for in webinar 3, our connected farm exemplar. So then we did prioritise from those workshops and from there, so because it's a bit unwieldy to deal with 96 metrics down to sort of 20 or so, again, within that framework of the 5 domains. So the green are resource-based and the black are the animal-based metrics of importance. And nutrition was again where there was most already known, and a lot of these measures, we're talking body condition score and feed availability, are already widely used on farm. When we looked at environment, and I will focus on the heat stress because that is one of our case studies and it is really important. And the gold standard is the third one down there across the world is measuring respiration rate, but that's very technical, very intensive and not really done on farm. So part of our whole work program has been how can we get some metrics that are as good or how we can measure on farm to give some of that feedback. And we did also look, if you look at heat load index, there is a predictive heat load index, but that's another example of what does it actually mean for our grazing system. And that was work that was done in this program that you'll also hear about in the next webinar. I won't go into detail on health. You can see it's very general because this is covered particularly by vets and also is very specific to area and diseases and treatments. But that's the general principles, of course, about having healthy animals. And then of the behaviour, as I said, this was the least measured and the least really known about, but was recognised as important and important for us to start looking at what information we could get from the devices that are already out there and the information that's already out there and where we could grow. And we have particularly focused on time budget. So that's actually giving information about how cows are spending their time and how that might inform their overall well-being. So in summary, we just really wanted to look at how technology, then having looked at how we can measure these metrics and what is important for cow well-being, how that can be used to then improve animal well-being. We looked at what we can measure with current technology from those priority areas of the metrics, and as I said, then led to the use case projects about getting data and information and how that may inform us. I would say that there is still the future challenge of not only how we can measure some of these important things to understand about cow wellbeing, but then also how we might automate that. Thank you.
Thanks, Cheryl. Yeah, fascinating. It's really interesting to see, yeah, to hear from Gosia on that cow-centric vision, and yeah, putting animals in the center system, and then from Cheryl here, on just the amount of things that we would measure to get a good understanding of cow well-being on farm. And just looking at those metrics tables, even distilled down from the 98 that were put to, or 96 that were there originally, is that there's still quite a lot to measure. And fascinating to me that there's still quite a few gaps, but there's definitely some things that we have the technology available now to do, which kind of segues in very well to our next speaker, which will be Jenny Jago from DairyNZ, who's going to be talking about the DairyNZ technology and workplace practices survey results. Yeah, Jenny, take it away. Thanks. Oh, Jenny, I think you're still muted there.
Okay, so just checking that slides are visible and I can be heard. Okay, cool. Welcome everybody. So the NZ Bidder project is very much a forward looking program of work, and looking at that intersection between understanding animal well-being and the digital world. While we're doing that, it is important to have a good understanding of where farmers are at right now, particularly in relation to the uptake of technology that might have the potential to tell us something about animal well-being. And so the next few minutes and slides, we're going to present some data that's come from a DairyNZ survey that's been going on now every 5 years since 2008, called the Technology and Workplace Practices Survey. And this full survey is on the DairyNZ website, so I encourage you to go there to get the full details. The survey itself, as I said, is done every 5 years, and the most recent one being in 2023. Originally, we were looking just at technology practices and milking practices, technology uptake and milking practices, but over time it has morphed into more workplace practices. I have requested that slide move on, but it hasn't on my screen. So has it moved on other screens?
No, it hasn't, Jenny.
Okay.
Did you want me to?
I think you, yeah, if you,
want.
I'm going to stop sharing because I think we've got an issue. And if you put the slides up,
Sure.
Laura, that will be great. And I'll just go off those. Okay, cool. Thank you. Okay, so the survey has been done by the same small group of people over that time, and certainly want to acknowledge Callum Eswood, Brian Delarue and Susan Cuthbert, who have done the work most recently on this. We survey 500 farms, so equally an even split between the rotary and the herringbone dairies, so 250 of those each. That's to get good data off both of those samples. Just keep in mind though that there are a lot more herringbones in New Zealand, 68% of dairies, whereas there are 30% of dairies are rotaries. We are interested in a number of things: technology impact, uptake and impact, milking practices, efficiency metrics, and more recently we have become interested in pasture measurement tools, given the importance that they have in our system. Next slide, please, Laura. So one of the things that's quite important for us to think about when we are thinking about technology and its role on farms is to have a good understanding of what the working day looks like. And we get that data from this survey. So the data paints a picture of a fairly long work day, around 13 hours on average, that starts early around 5:30 a.m. we've got over 50% of herds with cups on, and that we're spending a lot of time milking. So over 50% of hours worked are milking and 30 hours a week cupping cows. So keep that in mind when we're thinking about the role that technology can play to help farmers in terms of reducing workload, but also making decisions. Next slide, please, Laura. One of the things we look at is the use of automation in the dairy. So we've got our herringbones on the left, our rotaries on the right, and then the data coming off the surveys from 2008 to 2023 are the different shaded bars against each of the technologies. So there's one main thing to notice from this graph, and that is that there is a lot more use of automation technologies on rotary dairies, especially the bottom three. So one more click, Laura. The bottom three, which are the cup removers, teat sprayers and auto drafting, and that really allows those sheds to become one-person operations. But yep, so we have a lot more tech on rotaries. Next slide, please. Moving on to the animal monitoring technologies. Now, these are the ones that we're most interested in the NZ Bidder project. So first thing to notice is that there is a lot lower levels of animal monitoring technology on farms, regardless of whether they're herringbone dairies or herds milked in rotaries. But the second thing to notice here is that down in the bottom one, the heat detection and cow wearables, in the last survey period, we saw a very large increase in the adoption of those technologies. And that's really been a pretty major shift over that relatively short period of time, which does raise the potential for data capture of quite a large number of animals. And if we look at the next slide, you can see there that if we just think about collars, 13% of all herds are wearing collars. They tend to be the larger herds. So that translates to around 820,000 animals with those types of devices. If we add in some of the other wearables, we get up to 16% of herds. So that is really starting to get up to a fairly sizable portion of animals across the national herd, which creates a lot of potential in terms of what that data is able to tell us, and thinking about that in relation to some of the wellbeing metrics that Cheryl spoke of just before. Next slide, Laura. One of the things we're always interested in is where farmers might be heading and their thoughts on the adoption of technology. And this slide here gives you information on what might be on farmers' technology wish list. And so you have, some of the things that have been around for a long time, like mastitis detection, and some of the automation technologies are there, which are fairly well adopted. Not mastitis detection, that's low rates of adoption, but some of the automation technologies from those previous slides, you can see they're highly adopted already, so you wouldn't expect to see a lot more there. But the one that stands out is the cow wearables again, and that's across herds that are milked through either herringbones or rotaries. So there is very strong appetite and interest in these technologies amongst farmers. Next slide, Laura. The last one here is pasture measurement, and it's something that we're interested in DairyNZ, because obviously in the country the performance of farms economically is driven very much based on the pasture performance and the ability to harvest lots of homegrown feed. So we have had a look at this. So we have 36% of herds using some form of objective measure. Still, by far the most common is the eye, the visual estimate. However, there's a slightly more farms recording their data in some sort of software. Now, we're interested in this from the NZ Better perspective because we've done some work to really ask, can we use the cow and her wearable to tell us something useful or some useful information about pasture management? And that piece of work will be presented in the next webinar, so come along and hear about that. And the last slide, Laura. So in summary, the use of technology on farms continues to increase. It's the time-saving technologies that have been the focus for farmers, and it's not surprising when we think about that description or that picture of the working day that we see on farms. While the animal monitoring technologies have lower rates of adoption, we are starting to see a large increase in the use of cow wearables, and the interest in those is quite strong. Which means that that does present us with an opportunity, because it is looking like it's going to become possible to start to collect wellbeing metrics, and especially if we think back to some of those things in Cheryl's list. And that growing amount of data is certainly presenting us with an opportunity, and I think it's important to maximise that potential. And through the rest of the webinars, you'll see how we've attempted to do that. So back to you, Laura.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jenny. Fascinating to see all of that data come through. Definitely obvious that there's quite a lot of movement in the tech space, and a lot of growth. And yeah, it's starting to become possible to collect a lot more of those wellbeing metrics in the future. We have, I think, a few more minutes. We were trying to keep this webinar nice and short and sharp today. So I think we will move into some questions. Before we do, though, I just would like to say thank you so much to all of our speakers today, Gosia and Cheryl and Jenny, as well as you for tuning in and listening to us today. And to the rest of the project team from AgResearch and DairyNZ and Fonterra, who've worked on this project over the past years, and the people who've been involved in all of these workshops that we've mentioned today. Couldn't have done it without you guys. So we do have a few questions that have come through on the Q&A function. Yeah, well, I might jump into it. A few questions for people. Jenny, I might start on this because the adoption of technology is top of mind right now. Does the adoption in tech correlate with improved animal efficiency and/or welfare metrics?
It's a very good question, and the answer to that is actually we don't know at this stage. Certainly, there is a big gap in the knowledge of the relationship between the use of technology, I'm thinking about animal wellbeing here, and actual performance on farm. As you'll see, that the use of the technology is fairly recent, and so I think there is a lot of work to be done there just to establish those relationships. If we think back to the technologies that have been adopted for a longer period of time, so those time-saving technologies, there is good data there, particularly around the milking efficiency, and certainly we see good gains there. And I think my sort of experience would be that it takes quite a while when you start to see adoption of technologies for farmers to really take what might be known from a scientific perspective, but then really embed them and work with that information and get the real practical application working well. So it's not surprising that we see the sort of gains in the automation and the labour reducing side when we don't really, and we're only just getting into the more of the animal management side. So I think it's a big gap, and it's a big opportunity too.
Awesome, thank you. Another question through here, I think this might be best answered by Cheryl. Why do you think 25% of stakeholders saw little value of water intake for the cow? It's quite surprising that it was that high, considering that they're milking cows, dairy cows, not beef. Do you have any thoughts around that?
Well, yes, I think actually, I don't think it was little value, it was moderate value. And remember, that's just a summary from the survey results from everybody. And there was quite a lot of discussion, and we didn't go into that, but I can remember quite a lot of discussion about whether it was water flow or water intake and which elements were important and how they interrelated. So yes, I don't think it's because, given the groups that we had there, remember quite a variety of stakeholders, it wasn't that they didn't see it as important. I think it's just where they put their relative priority list and value on which measure of water was the important one. And there was a lot of conversations about what you should measure and what were the important elements with water and how they were related.
If I just add in there, that is quite an unusual result, and I wonder whether it's something that people feel is well established, it's dealt with, it's not something that's kind of important on farms because it's something that's well done. We do have some data actually from some other work which shows that it's probably an area we need to pay a bit more attention to, and that is the water availability and the access particularly to clean water. So it's probably something that was a little bit surprising to me that it's still a concern on a reasonable number of farms. So it's probably something we need to put a bit more focus on, I think, in the future.
Yes. Okay. Cool. One more question. We were aiming to end at 12:45, but I might just ask one more. There seems to be little mention of veterinarians, who are the primary champions of animal well-being on farm and who are best placed to help farmers implement better systems and processes. Have we considered the role of vets in animal well-being, like Fonterra has done with the well-being plans? I don't know. Gosia, can you jump in here?
Yep. Yep, absolutely. So in the work that we did, we actually, vets were one of the key experts that allowed us to, or basically helped us come up with all the various things that could go into a future system. We made a conscious decision not to include anyone but farmers in the actual discussions because we didn't want it to be led. Conversations can very quickly go awry or go into a specific area if we put different stakeholders in that same discussion. So sometimes it's a good move, but in this case we were really interested from the farmer's perspective. So that's why in our case the vet was involved at the very beginning, but wasn't involved through the workshop part.
And if I just add, we didn't, from our workshops and stakeholders, vets were actually in several of those groups, particularly the rural professionals. We didn't just say vets, we wanted the broader people going out on farm, because absolutely, what do they need? How can they get these packaging? How can they be? But they were included in the companies and the scientists and so we did certainly had vets, and no, we're not excluding them. They're an integral part of it on this journey.
And I'd just add, I think there are vet groups that are leading the charge in terms of trying to understand some of the health related information, at least coming off these technologies. So I think in this project we've been thinking more beyond animal health and thinking more broadly around that definition of animal well-being and how some of the technologies can help us understand that better. But certainly acknowledge the efforts and the work vets are doing with the existing health-related technology information.
Excellent. Thanks, Jenny and Cheryl and Gosia. We have gone a little bit over time from our anticipated 12:45 end. There are a few really cool questions that have come through in the Q&A function. Do we have time to answer those ones, or are we? Okay, cool, good. So this one is a pretty easy one, but what was the water question looked at for heifer replacement for dairy as well? This is probably Cheryl. How impacting is water on growth rates and health for young stock and replacements? Yeah, go ahead, Cheryl.
Good question. Not specifically in this, not specifically looking at the details for heifer and replacements and what that means. But as Jenny said before, and as we consider the fact of change and heat stress, that water is not just important for your milking animals. So absolutely. So some of that messaging around the importance of water. Good to hear.
And Jenny, what's the blue sky thinking on future tech options as far as what we're going to see? Can you talk to the work around robotic milking? Doesn't seem to have solved the labor challenge. And what about OmniEye, trying to use tech to ID lameness?
Very good question. So I think from a labour, making the job easier, reducing the need for manual labour perspective, you're right, robotic milking, while there's been proof of concept, it has certainly not taken off in New Zealand. There is some rework going on that to think how we could potentially use it in the future in a slightly modified form. Very early days. I think the blue skies thinking really is some of the things that you're going to see coming through in the next two webinars. So I think there's a lot that we can do with what we have, and that's where we need to put our focus, not beyond at the moment. So we have now getting ourselves into a situation where we have a lot of data that's coming off at the individual animal level, which we need to really deeply try and understand and look at how it can help us understand animal well-being, which is the purpose of this work. So some of the work done on can the animal combined with her wearable tell us something about pasture management? That's pretty novel, and Paul will talk about that at the next webinar. Some of the work that has looked at how these technologies can tell us something about the animal state at a particular time, and then relating her state to weather data and then predictive models to enable farmers to be proactively managing conditions like heat stress. It's perhaps not what you would describe as blue sky thinking, but I think it's much closer to where we need to be putting our effort, given what we are starting to have available to us, you know, as a sector and as a farming community.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you, Jenny. I think you nailed it. And yeah, you've talked about a few of the upcoming webinars, which we will hopefully, well, we'll definitely be delving into a little bit more of the application of technology that we've used to tackle some of these well-being challenges and integrating these different technology systems essentially. So I think that's the end of the questions for now, and we've definitely gone over time, but I really appreciate everybody sticking around for a little bit longer. Yeah, thank you so much for tuning in today and listening, and for these excellent questions. Do hope that you join us again next Monday, same time, same place, for the next webinar series. Yeah, thank you so much.